The ultimate outcome of God's intervention in the life of a narcissist is not merely a momentary humbling or the temporary loss of their false sense of superiority. Rather, it is the opportunity for profound, lasting transformation. The narcissist, who has spent much of their life constructing a world around themselves based on their inflated self-image, finds that their identity is no longer sustainable. They are confronted with the painful truth that their self-worth cannot be built on manipulation, control, or external validation. For the narcissist, this is not simply a challenge to their ego, it is an existential crisis. The very foundation of who they believe themselves to be is cracked, and they are left with the daunting task of rebuilding themselves. This process of rebuilding is not easy, but it is in this space of vulnerability and exposure that true growth can occur. At the heart of this transformation is the shift from ego-driven living to a life grounded in authenticity. For the narcissist, authenticity is often an elusive concept. They are so accustomed to presenting a version of themselves to the world that is curated, carefully managed, and inflated beyond recognition. The idea that they can live without this facade is terrifying, as it requires them to acknowledge the insecurities and imperfections that they have spent their entire lives hiding. This shift from ego to authenticity is not a one-time event, but a gradual process of shedding false beliefs and assumptions about oneself. As the narcissist learns to let go of the need to be perfect, to be superior, and to be in control, they start to discover the freedom that comes from embracing their true, unvarnished self. In this space of authenticity, the narcissist is also forced to confront the reality of their relationships. Narcissists are often unable to form genuine, meaningful connections with others because they view relationships through the lens of their own self-interest. They see others as tools to be used for their personal gain, rather than as individuals with their own unique needs and desires. The process of rebuilding oneself involves a profound shift in how the narcissist relates to others. They begin to realize that true connection is not about control, manipulation, or admiration, but about vulnerability, mutual respect, and empathy. For the first time, they understand that relationships are about give and take, about supporting one another through the ups and downs of life. This realization can be deeply humbling, as it requires the narcissist to let go of their desire to dominate and instead learn to connect with others on a deeper, more authentic level. As the narcissist continues to let go of their ego and their need for external validation, they also begin to recognize the importance of self-reflection and self-awareness. Narcissists are often blind to their own flaws and shortcomings, preferring to project an image of invulnerability and perfection. However, true self-awareness requires the ability to look inward, to acknowledge one's own weaknesses, and to accept responsibility for one's actions. This is a critical aspect of the rebuilding process, as it forces the narcissist to take ownership of their past mistakes, to recognize the harm they have caused, and to seek genuine growth and change. The narcissist who is willing to engage in this process of self-reflection is able to move beyond the rigid walls of their ego and embrace the fluidity and complexity of their true self. The rebuilding process also involves the development of empathy. Narcissists, by definition, lack the ability to see the world from another person's perspective. Their lives are dominated by their own desires, and they view others primarily as instruments to be used in the pursuit of their goals. But as they begin to shed their self-centered worldview, they start to develop a deeper understanding of the struggles and challenges faced by others. They recognize that everyone, including themselves, is vulnerable and imperfect, and that true strength lies in the ability to empathize with others and offer support. This shift in perspective is a critical part of the narcissist's transformation, as it allows them to form more authentic and meaningful relationships based on mutual care and respect. In the process of rebuilding, the narcissist is also faced with the question of purpose. For much of their life, their purpose has been defined by external success, validation, and admiration. They have lived in pursuit of accolades, recognition, and power, believing that these external markers of success would bring them fulfillment. But as they begin to rebuild themselves, they realize that true fulfillment does not come from the accolades of others, but from living a life that is aligned with their core values and principles. They start to see that their purpose is not to dominate or control, but to contribute to the world in a meaningful way, to support others, and to be of service. This realization can be deeply transformative, as it shifts their focus away from the pursuit of self-glorification and toward the pursuit of genuine impact and contribution. This process of transformation is not easy, and it is not linear. There will be setbacks, moments of resistance, and times when the narcissist feels tempted to return to old patterns of behavior. But over time, with persistence and a willingness to grow, they begin to experience a profound shift in their perspective on life, relationships, and themselves. They begin to understand that true strength is found in humility, that authentic connection comes from vulnerability, and that their worth is not determined by external validation, but by their intrinsic value as human beings. As the narcissist moves through this process, they become more attuned to the deeper currents of life, more aware of their impact on others, and more willing to live in alignment with their true self. Through God's intervention, the narcissist's world is shattered, but it is through the rebuilding process that they find their true purpose and a deeper sense of fulfillment. Humility is often misunderstood in today's world. It is frequently perceived as a weakness or as something that involves self-deprecation. In reality, humility is the foundation of true strength. It is not about diminishing oneself or ignoring one's value, but rather about embracing one's limitations, acknowledging the reality of one's imperfections, and finding strength in vulnerability. For the narcissist, humility is an alien concept. Narcissists, by definition, are driven by an inflated sense of self-importance and a need for validation. They believe their worth is derived from admiration, success, and external validation. To them, humility is anathema, something to be avoided at all costs. Yet it is only through humility that the narcissist can break free from the shackles of their own ego and begin to grow into a more authentic and grounded version of themselves. Humility is not about self-sacrifice or putting others above oneself in a way that diminishes one's own worth. Instead, it is about recognizing that we are not the center of the universe, and that we are part of a greater whole. It is about understanding that there is always more to learn, that no one has all the answers, and that each individual has their own unique role to play in the unfolding of life. This understanding brings with it a profound sense of peace because it allows us to let go of the constant pressure to prove ourselves, to maintain a facade of perfection, and to control every outcome in our lives. Humility invites us to simply be who we are, to embrace our imperfections, and to acknowledge that growth and strength come from recognizing our limitations, not from denying them. For the narcissist, humility is often a painful journey because it requires the dismantling of their carefully constructed self-sigil. Narcissists are addicted to their sense of superiority, and the idea that they might not be as exceptional or infallible as they believe is threatening. Humbling experiences, whether through failure, rejection, or loss, are deeply challenging because they force the narcissist to confront the reality of their own flaws and limitations. The very things they have spent years avoiding and hiding behind, insecurities, fears, and vulnerabilities, must be acknowledged in order for growth to occur. And yet, this process is necessary for true transformation. Without humility, the narcissist is trapped in a cycle of self-delusion, unable to move beyond their narrow, ego-driven view of the world. Humility opens the door to authenticity. When the narcissist begins to accept that they are not perfect, they free themselves from the constant pressure to be seen as flawless and invulnerable. They begin to see that their worth does not depend on external validation, but rather on the intrinsic value that comes from being true to oneself. In this space of authenticity, the narcissist can start to cultivate deeper, more meaningful relationships based on mutual respect and understanding rather than manipulation and control. They no longer need to rely on others for constant affirmation. Instead, they can simply be present in their relationships without the need to dominate or manipulate. The shift from arrogance to humility also brings with it a new understanding of vulnerability. Vulnerability, often perceived as a weakness, is actually a source of tremendous strength. It takes great courage to expose one's true self, to admit that one does not have all the answers, and to allow oneself to be seen as imperfect. For the narcissist, this may be one of the most difficult aspects of the journey toward humility. The narcissist has spent so much time hiding their flaws and projecting an image of invulnerability that the idea of showing vulnerability is terrifying. Yet it is in this very vulnerability that true connection with others can be found. When the narcissist is willing to be open about their imperfections, they allow others to do the same. This creates the foundation for deeper, more compassionate relationships where both parties can support each other in their growth. Humility also helps the narcissist develop empathy. Narcissists are often trapped in their own self-centered view of the world, unable to see beyond their own desires and needs. However, when they begin to embrace humility, they start to recognize that they are not the only ones with struggles, challenges, and vulnerabilities. They begin to see others not as objects to be used for their own benefit, but as individuals with their own experiences and emotions. This shift in perspective allows the narcissist to cultivate compassion and empathy, traits that were previously foreign to them. They begin to understand that true strength comes not from being above others, but from standing alongside them, supporting them, and recognizing the shared human experience that binds them together. The process of developing humility is not easy for the narcissist, and it is often painful. It requires them to face their deepest fears and insecurities, to confront the illusions they have built about themselves, and to let go of the need for constant validation. But it is through this process that they can experience true freedom. The freedom to be themselves, to let go of the pressure to be perfect, and to embrace the beauty of their own imperfections. Humility allows them to live a life that is not driven by ego, but by a deeper sense of purpose and connection to others. In this space, they find the strength to grow, to evolve, and to live a life that is grounded in truth and authenticity. The narcissist, when humbled, discovers that true power lies not in dominating others, but in embracing vulnerability, empathy, and the shared human experience that unites us all. Suffering is often seen as an unavoidable and painful aspect of life, one that most people try to avoid at all costs. For the narcissist, suffering can feel particularly harsh because it directly challenges their constructed identity and sense of control. Narcissists who live in a world built on self-importance and external validation tend to resist anything that exposes their vulnerabilities or diminishes their perceived superiority. They are often unwilling to accept the reality that life is unpredictable and they cannot control every aspect of their existence. This creates a deep inner conflict, as the narcissist struggles with the idea that they may not be as powerful, invincible, or exceptional as they believe themselves to be. However, it is in this very suffering that true personal transformation can occur. The paradox of suffering is that although it is painful and difficult to endure, it is through our suffering that we are most likely to experience growth. For the narcissist, suffering serves as a kind of spiritual awakening when their carefully constructed self-injection is shattered by failure, loss, or rejection. They are forced to confront the truth about themselves. The ego that once appeared invulnerable is exposed as fragile and temporary. The narcissist, who once believed they were entitled to constant admiration and success, is now faced with the reality of their human limitations. This confrontation with their own imperfections can be deeply humbling, and it is often through this humbling process that they begin to change. In a way, suffering strips away the false layers of the self and exposes what is beneath. The narcissist, whose identity has been defined by pride, arrogance, and external validation, is now confronted with the raw and unembellished truth of who they are. For many, this can feel like a loss of self, as they are forced to let go of the image they have created and face the reality of their own humanity. Yet it is only by experiencing this loss that they can truly begin to rebuild themselves, not based on falsehoods and illusions, but on a more authentic sense of self. The process of rebuilding, however, requires the narcissist to confront their deepest fears and insecurities, and this is where suffering plays a crucial role. As difficult as it may be, suffering has a way of breaking down the walls that the narcissist has built around themselves. It is in the moments of pain, humiliation, or failure that they are most likely to recognize their need for change. The suffering may not come all at once, and it may not always be obvious, but it is in the small moments of vulnerability and exposure that the narcissist begins to understand that they are not the all-powerful figure they once believed themselves to be. Over time, this realization can help the narcissist develop greater self-awareness and empathy for others as they begin to understand that everyone, including themselves, is vulnerable to the unpredictability of life. At the heart of suffering is the opportunity to let go of the need for control. Narcissists are often driven by the desire to control their environments, to maintain a sense of superiority, and to dictate the terms of their relationships. When suffering enters the picture, this illusion of control is shattered. The narcissist is forced to recognize that life cannot be fully controlled and that their efforts to manipulate and control others are ultimately futile. This realization can be a turning point in their personal growth as they begin to understand the value of surrendering to the flow of life and accepting the uncertainties and imperfections that come with it. Moreover, suffering often forces the narcissist to examine their relationships with others. The narcissist, who may have spent their life viewing others as tools to be used for personal gain, is now confronted with the reality that true connection cannot be built on manipulation or self-interest. As they endure suffering, they begin to see that empathy, vulnerability, and mutual respect are essential for forming meaningful relationships. This shift in perspective can be a transformative moment as the narcissist learns to see others as equals rather than as objects to be controlled or dominated. However, this transformation is not always easy or immediate. The narcissist may initially resist the lessons that suffering offers, as they are conditioned to deny their weaknesses and project an image of invulnerability. They may cling to the idea that they are still in control, even when their circumstances suggest otherwise. But as time goes on and the pain of their suffering deepens, the narcissist is more likely to begin to accept the reality of their own limitations and the impermanence of their self-image. This is when the possibility for true healing and growth emerges. Suffering also teaches the narcissist that they are not alone in their struggles. One of the key aspects of narcissism is the tendency to isolate oneself and see oneself as separate or superior to others. However, suffering is a universal experience, and it is through shared vulnerability that true connection can occur. As the narcissist begins to experience their own suffering, they may begin to recognize the suffering of others, which can foster a deeper sense of empathy and understanding. This shift in perspective opens the door for the narcissist to develop more genuine, compassionate relationships, moving beyond their self-centered view of the world. In essence, suffering is a catalyst for change. For the narcissist, it is the force that forces them to confront their false self, their insecurities, and their need for control. Though it is painful and uncomfortable, it is through this suffering that they are given the opportunity to grow and evolve. It is not the suffering itself that defines them, but how they respond to it. If they are willing to face their vulnerabilities and accept the lessons that suffering offers, they can emerge from the experience stronger, more humble, and more connected to the truth of who they really are. As God's humbling process is a profound and often painful experience, one that exposes the false self constructed by the narcissist over the course of their life. At the core of this process is the idea that true humility comes not from self-effort, but from being confronted with the limitations of one's own nature. Narcissists, in their arrogance and self-importance, live in a world where their own narrative reigns supreme. They see themselves as central figures in the drama of life, entitled to admiration and success simply because they exist. But this illusion can only last for so long, as God's intervention, often in subtle and sometimes dramatic ways, forces the narcissist to face the reality that they are not the all-powerful, all-knowing beings they believe themselves to be. In the beginning, the narcissist may resist the humbling process. After all, they have spent their entire lives constructing an identity based on their own perceived greatness. The idea that they might be humbled, exposed, or stripped of their illusions is anathema to everything they believe in. They may feel that they have earned their position in life, that their talents and abilities should guarantee them success and admiration. So, when adversity strikes, whether in the form of failure, loss, or a confrontation with their own shortcomings, it is often experienced as a personal attack. To the narcissist, such events feel like a profound injustice. They are unwilling to acknowledge that their inflated sense of self may have led them to a place where they are now vulnerable and exposed. But God's humbling process does not occur in a vacuum. It is not random or arbitrary. It is a direct consequence of the individual's need to be humbled and redirected. The narcissist's ego, which has been nurtured by external validation and self-aggrandizement, is fragile and will eventually face challenges that it cannot overcome by its own strength. It is during these moments of crisis that the narcissist is forced to reckon with the limits of their own power. Whether through personal failure, a shattered relationship, or a moment of intense humiliation, the narcissist is confronted with the reality that they are not invincible, and their carefully constructed self-image begins to crumble. This process is often painful, not just for the narcissist, but for those around them. As the narcissist's self-perception begins to disintegrate, they may lash out in anger or bitterness. They may resist accepting the truth, preferring instead to hold on to the illusion of control that has served them for so long. But in these moments of resistance, there is an opportunity for transformation. Humility is not something that can be forced. It must be chosen. The narcissist can either reject the lesson presented by their humbling experience and continue down the path of denial, or they can choose to embrace the discomfort of vulnerability and, in doing so, move toward a more authentic understanding of themselves. God's intervention in this process may not always be immediate or obvious. Sometimes the humbling process occurs gradually through a series of events that chip away at the narcissist's false sense of self. Other times it may be a singular event, a failure, a crisis, that forces the narcissist to confront the truth of their own limitations. Either way, the ultimate goal of this process is not to punish the individual, but to guide them toward a deeper understanding of their own humanity. The narcissist's pride and arrogance must be broken down in order to make room for a more genuine sense of self that is not dependent on external validation, control, or superiority. As the narcissist begins to recognize their own limitations, they may also begin to see the world in a different light. No longer are they the center of the universe, deserving of admiration and adoration. Instead, they are confronted with the reality that they are part of a larger whole, one that does not revolve around their own desires and whims. This shift in perspective can be disorienting and humbling, but it is also liberating. For the first time, the narcissist is free to let go of the constant pressure to be perfect, to be in control, and to be seen as superior. In this space of humility, they are able to discover a more authentic sense of self that is grounded in truth rather than in illusion. In many ways, God's humbling process is an invitation to personal growth. It is not about diminishing the individual, but about leading them to a place where they can grow beyond their ego and embrace their true potential. It is through humility that the narcissist can begin to build a more genuine relationship with others, free from the need for manipulation or control. They can start to see people as they truly are, complex, imperfect, and deserving of love and respect. In doing so, they open themselves up to deeper connections and a more meaningful existence. At the same time, the humbling process also brings the narcissist face to face with their own wounds and vulnerability. Many narcissists develop their false sense of self as a defense mechanism, a way to shield themselves from the pain of past trauma or neglect. As they are humbled, these hidden wounds may resurface, requiring the individual to confront the underlying causes of their narcissism. This can be an incredibly difficult and painful process, but it is also an essential step in healing. By acknowledging their wounds and embracing their imperfections, the narcissist can begin to heal the broken parts of themselves and move toward a more balanced, integrated sense of self. The journey through humility is not an easy one, but it is a necessary and transformative process that brings the narcissist closer to their true self and their greater purpose in life. Through God's intervention, the false self is exposed, and the individual is given the opportunity to rebuild their identity on a foundation of authenticity, vulnerability, and self-awareness. In doing so, they can begin to live a life that is aligned with their true nature, free from the need for constant validation and control. The illusion of control and self-importance is one of the most dangerous and pervasive characteristics of narcissism. At the heart of this illusion is the belief that one is not only in control of their own life, but also that the world around them should bend to their will. Narcissists often operate under the assumption that they are entitled to special treatment, that they deserve admiration and success simply because of who they are. This belief in their own exceptionalism leads them to expect others to acknowledge their superiority and cater to their desires. They construct a reality in which their importance is unquestioned, and any deviation from this narrative is met with disdain or hostility. At a deeper psychological level, this sense of control and self-importance often stems from a fragile sense of self. Narcissists, rather than being confident in their abilities or accomplishments, rely heavily on the external validation they receive from others to maintain their self-esteem. They may have a surface-level confidence, but this confidence is built on a shaky foundation. Beneath the bravado lies a person who is constantly seeking reassurance and praise from the outside world. This external validation serves as the fuel for their self-worth. And when it is lacking or threatened, the narcissist feels an intense sense of panic. To mask this vulnerability, they project an image of unshakable control, reinforcing the idea that they are invulnerable to any external threat or criticism. This need for control extends far beyond personal success in relationships. It often permeates every aspect of a narcissist's life. The narcissist seeks to control how they are perceived, how others behave, and how situations unfold. They want to shape their environment to reflect their idealized self-image. Whether in their career, their personal life, or in social situations, narcissists often work tirelessly to manipulate outcomes in their favor. This desire to control is not merely a matter of ambition or strategic thinking. It is a defense against the deep insecurity that lurks beneath the surface. By creating a world that revolves around them, the narcissist can avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth that they are not as in control as they would like to believe. This sense of entitlement to control is often accompanied by a lack of empathy. Narcissists may not recognize or may outright disregard the needs and feelings of others because they are so consumed with maintaining their own image and status. They operate from a position of self-interest, viewing relationships and interactions as transactions in which they must always come out on top. When others do not meet their expectations, or when the narcissist's attempts at control fail, they may react with anger, frustration, or even vengeance. These reactions are fueled by the narcissist's fear of being exposed as someone who is not in control, someone who is weak or vulnerable. The illusion of control also feeds into the narcissist's need to be seen as the center of attention. They believe that the world should revolve around them and that others should recognize their greatness without question. This belief leads to an exaggerated sense of importance, where the narcissist sees themselves as a figure deserving of admiration, recognition, and special privileges. In their mind, the rules of the world are different for them. They should not have to conform to the same standards as everyone else because they are exceptional. This sense of entitlement often creates conflict as others begin to see through the narcissist's facade and push back against their demands. When the illusion of control is threatened, the narcissist's response is often one of denial and defensiveness. They may react with denial of their own shortcomings, projecting blame onto others and refusing to accept responsibility for their failures. When things go wrong, they are rarely willing to acknowledge their own role in the situation. Instead, they will likely find someone or something else to blame, maintaining the illusion that they are always right, always in control, and always superior to those around them. This inability to accept failure is a direct consequence of their fragile self-esteem and the fear that if they acknowledge their flaws, their carefully constructed image will collapse. In the face of failure or rejection, narcissists often become hostile, lashing out at those who have challenged their self-position. They may resort to tactics such as gaslighting, manipulation, or even vindictiveness to restore their sense of control and superiority. These actions stem from an underlying fear of being exposed for what they truly are: imperfect, vulnerable, and in need of others. The narcissist is terrified of revealing their true self because it undermines the very illusion of invulnerability that they have built around their identity. In the long run, the illusion of control and self-importance is unsustainable. Reality has a way of breaking through even the most carefully constructed facades. No amount of manipulation, self-aggrandizement, or external validation can protect the narcissist from the inevitable challenges and failures that life presents. Sooner or later, their world will start to unravel. When the illusion is shattered, the narcissist is forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. They are not in control, and they are not as special or invincible as they once believed. This moment of reckoning is often a painful and humbling experience, one that may lead to growth, or in some cases, to further attempts at denial and self-deception. Now, let me tell you something about human nature. It's a complex thing, isn't it? Full of contradictions, pride, and vulnerability. And at the heart of this complexity lies a dangerous force, the force of narcissism. The individual who is consumed with self-importance, who believes that the world revolves around them, who seeks to manipulate and control the narratives around their life. They walk through life as though they are gods in their own right. But Here's the truth, and it's a hard truth, one that many of us are afraid to face. God has a way of exposing and humbling every narcissist. Narcissism is often misunderstood as mere arrogance or self-centeredness, but it runs much deeper than that. At its core, narcissism is a defense mechanism, a psychological shield constructed to protect the individual from the vulnerability and pain that come with the awareness of their own weaknesses and limitations. People who exhibit narcissistic traits have typically developed this defense mechanism early in life, often in response to feelings of inadequacy, neglect, or emotional abuse. The narcissist's inflated sense of self-importance serves as a psychological armor against the world's harsh realities, particularly the fear of being unseen or unloved. In many cases, individuals who develop narcissistic traits have experienced childhood environments where emotional needs were not met, or where affection was conditional. This creates a deep-seated belief that love and acceptance are only attainable through external validation and admiration. The narcissist grows up with a constant, gnawing insecurity, though they may not consciously recognize it. This insecurity manifests as an overwhelming need for admiration and praise, as well as a tendency to exaggerate one's accomplishments, talents, and importance. The outward display of superiority and entitlement is, in fact, a carefully crafted facade designed to hide an inner emptiness, a fear that they are not enough. The narcissist often seeks to manipulate the way they are perceived by others, carefully curating their image and emphasizing their achievements, beauty, intelligence, or power. This external validation becomes the lifeblood of their self-esteem. They thrive on the admiration of others because it temporarily silences the inner voice of doubt and insecurity. Without this validation, the narcissist feels lost, fragile, and exposed. Their sense of self-worth is entirely dependent on how they are seen by others rather than on any internal sense of value or meaning. For the narcissist, the world becomes a stage upon which they must perform, constantly seeking approval and admiration. This compulsion for external validation often leads to manipulation and exploitation of others. They may use charm, flattery, or even deceit to control their relationships and maintain a sense of superiority. In this way, narcissism serves as a protective shield, preventing the individual from confronting their own vulnerability and the painful reality of their limitations. However, this defense mechanism comes at a significant cost. The narcissist's reliance on external validation prevents them from developing a genuine sense of self-worth based on internal qualities. They are trapped in a cycle of constant need for approval, which ultimately leads to emotional instability. When the narcissist's self-improvement is challenged or criticized, they are unable to cope with the resulting feelings of inadequacy and shame. These emotions are so intolerable that they may react with anger, defensiveness, or even rage. The narcissist cannot accept the possibility that they are anything less than perfect, so they go to great lengths to protect their fragile ego from being exposed. The narcissist may also develop a tendency to dehumanize others, seeing them as mere tools to be used in the pursuit of validation and power. Relationships are no longer about mutual respect or genuine connection, but rather about feeding their own ego. They may exploit others for their own benefit, all the while convincing themselves that they are deserving of such treatment. This creates a toxic dynamic in relationships where the narcissist constantly seeks to elevate themselves at the expense of others. The core of narcissism, then, is not true self-love, but self-protection. It is a distorted and fragile form of self-identity built on a shaky foundation of external validation. Narcissists may appear confident and self-assured, but beneath the surface, they are often deeply insecure and terrified of being exposed as flawed or imperfect. Their inflated sense of self is a defense mechanism designed to keep others at a distance and to avoid the painful truths about themselves. It is easier to maintain an image of superiority than to confront the vulnerability of being human. This defense mechanism may serve its purpose for a time, but over the long run, it is unsustainable. The narcissist's self-constructed identity will inevitably be challenged, whether through failure, rejection, or the inevitable passage of time. And when this happens, the illusion that they are invincible and beyond reproach begins to crack. The more they cling to their inflated self-imposed, the more they distance themselves from genuine connection with others and from their true selves. The defense mechanism may protect them for a while, but it also isolates them, leaving them with an unfulfilled and hollow existence. In this way, narcissism becomes both a shield and a prison, a trap that prevents the individual from facing the deeper, more painful truths about themselves.